Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope this episode helps you thrive in life and leadership. And if you enjoy it, subscribe to my channel. You'll never miss a thing. Well, did you see that Meta released its roadmap for AR and VR? I share some interesting content like that and also a whole lot of other things every Friday in my free newsletter called On the Rise. If you haven't subscribed to it, I would encourage you to do that. There's a lot more than just the podcast. You can go to ontherisenewsletter.com and subscribe today for free. You can leave anytime, but I think you're going to absolutely love the On the Rise newsletter every Friday. And today's episode is also brought to you by Compassion. Compassion, do you know that Compassion deals directly with the local church? So they sponsor about 2.2 million kids around the world. But that aid is delivered to every family, to every child through the power of the local church. So when you subscribe to a Compassion Child, when your church partners up with Compassion, you are directly helping the local church around the world. And if you're worried that being involved with Compassion is going to be some heavy lifting, just the opposite. They do all the work. In fact, when I was a lead pastor, we partnered up with Compassion, and my wife and I still sponsor kids. We're still involved with our church, but I'll tell you, they do all the work, and they allow your people to make a difference around the world. We have hundreds of kids sponsored through our church, and your church can do the same thing. So you can visit compassion.com/Carey for more information. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. David, welcome back. It's good to have you.
Carey, it is good to be back. And can I just say from the start, I think this is maybe the third time and the first time I was ever on with you. We hadn't met, interacted. I just walked away, and same with the last time and why I've been looking forward to this time. I'm so thankful for your genuineness, your authenticity, your I think it was Barbara Walters, wasn't it, that like used to make everybody cry when she interviewed them? I don't think I cried, but I was pretty close. Like it was, there was a depth in those conversations. I just want you to know, I am personally thankful for you. And for those who listen to your podcast, obviously they know this, but just for them to know from the other side of this microphone, how grateful I am for a genuine conversation with you. So I've been really looking forward to this. And I should add, my wife is like, tell Carey, I'm a huge fan of Carey Nieuwhof. So anyway, so you've got fans over here in the Platt household. And I just, on a personal level, just want you to know, I'm genuinely grateful for you and the way you lead in all kinds of ways, but particularly in this ministry.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for saying that. You know, I wake up every day surprised that I get to do this and have conversations with the leaders that I get to have conversations with. But I'm really grateful for you and your contribution. And, you know, in your latest book, just thank you for going there. I really appreciate it. So we're going to talk about that. And in Radical, you know, which is, can you believe that? Is that 10 years ago now?
Yeah, it's
David?
10 plus years. Yeah, it's over 10 years ago. Yeah.
It's when did that come out?
It is kind of insane. Man, I don't even remember, like now, off the top of my head, like 2009, around there.
Oh, is that long ago?
9, 10, wow. Somewhere. Yeah, it was over 10 years ago. And I mean, keep in mind, when I was the first book I'd written, I thought like my mom and a few people at our church would read it. And I think I'd read it one more time if I had thought that many people were going to read it. Like just, but in a way that, yes, God just, used it in a way, certainly in an Ephesians 3:20 and 21 kind of way, far beyond what I had asked or imagined. So.
Yeah, like one of those things, did I read somewhere it was on the New York Times bestseller list for 120 weeks or something like that?
I don't remember. I just remember the first week it was on there and the publisher called and they were like, we're trying to figure out if this is some kind of error or mistake. Like it doesn't, we didn't see
There's
this coming.
A vote of
you
confidence.
Yeah. So don't get your hopes up, but I think this actually happened. So yeah. And then the joke was that my wife and I always had, because all that time it was on the New York Times bestseller list, it would never eclipse the 5 love languages. And so it would get
Gary
like
Chapman.
up. But I just could never get get over the 5 love languages. And so Heather was just like, just remember that, like, that's more important. So the love languages. So anyway.
Boy, that's a vote of confidence from the publisher. We think this might be a mistake, but perhaps you're on the New York Times bestseller list.
It might be true. We'll see.
Might be true. But that's one of those things, like messages that take off. I met Gary Chapman. I think I've told this story before, but it bears repeating. And it's a good reminder for me. So we're in Edmonton, Alberta. I don't know. Have you ever been there, David?
I've not.
I'm a Canadian, so I can say this about my own country. Most Americans, most of the people who listen to the show are American. But anyway, we're in Edmonton, Alberta. It's minus 30. It doesn't matter whether that's minus Fahrenheit, minus 30 Fahrenheit or Celsius. You're dead in like 2 minutes. So we're standing there waiting for a bus to take us to the conference. And I notice, I'm like, I think that's Gary Chapman. And I go over to him while we're waiting for this shuttle van or whatever. And I'm like, are you Gary Chapman? And like, yeah. So we start talking about it. And it has sold more every year since it was released in like 1993. And he has no explanation for it other than God and people telling people about it. But then I thought, wait a minute. I was like one of the keynotes. He wasn't. And I'm kind of like, what are you doing here? Like, you've sold enough books that you don't need to be standing waiting for a van when it's minus 30 outside. So in the politest way I could, kind of asked him, what on earth are you doing here? He goes, oh, I'm doing a breakout. And I'm like, really? Gary Chapman's doing a breakout in Edmonton in January? I don't get this. Like, you live in a warm climate. He's in North Carolina. And I said, can I ask why you're doing it? And he just said, and the guy's like in his 70s at this point. And he just said, yeah, because there are people here whose marriages, like, they just don't know. They haven't heard. So I'm here to share the message. And I'm like, gosh, I hope that's me in 25 years.
That's awesome.
Like, isn't that humbling? I love that story. So
I do love that.
For everybody wondering how to blow up online, it's like sometimes you can't even plan it, right? So
yeah, sure. And wow, what a takeaway! Like, faithful to the end, and faithful when very few people are looking, and it's negative 30 degrees outside. Faithfulness. I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
So good.
So very, very pivotal moment for me. But it was back in Radical that you confronted the grip on the American dream and that had on Christians' faith. And that was sort of one of the premises of the book. So in your new book, Don't Hold Back, you revisit the culture and the gospel again. And it kind of feels like 2009 was a whole other world and a whole other era, right? So what do you see now as the underlying issues impacting the health of the church and the American gospel?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about Radical as I've written this book, because I feel like it's radical at a whole nother level. And the way I even put it in the book, I talk about how, so the subtitle for Radical was Taking Back Your Faith in the American Dream. After pastoring in Metro DC the last few years, I'm convinced it's not just an American dream that's consumed our lives. It's actually an American gospel that's hijacked our hearts, that we have believed the gospel we've embraced is different from the biblical gospel. And I think that's why we see the level of discouragement and disillusionment. And I was praying through who to dedicate this book to, and what came to my mind was discouraged, disillusioned, damaged, and divided Christians and the next generation. So, like, because I talk with so many on both those levels, people who are discouraged and disillusioned and divided in the church, and then a next generation that's like, so many people looking around saying, I thought there was more to Jesus than this. I thought there was more to the church than this. And I wanted to write this book to say there is so much more to Jesus and so much more to the church than what we're seeing around us right now. And we can experience it. Better put, we can experience him. But in order to do so, some things need to be different. And starting not in those people out there, but in you and me. There's some things we need to talk about, we need to address at the core of our hearts and what we believed that have led to this kind of atmosphere that we've seen around us in the church. And we have every reason to be encouraged when we look at Jesus and his design for the church. And so that's what I want to call us to do in this book.
I remember when I got the book sent by the publisher, advanced reader copy, an ARC or whatever, galley copy, whatever they call them. And I'm like, oh, he's going there. And I was so grateful that you were going there. How do you define the American gospel? Like what is your working definition of it?
Well, and I would say on the going there piece, just to kind of mention there, and that's why I titled the book Don't Hold Back, because I've been tempted all along the way over the last few years to not go there. Like, it feels like it'd be a lot easier and it'd lead to a lot less, I don't know, everything from slander to just pushback to challenges. Like, if we didn't step into some of these issues that need to be addressed. And so all that to say, I wrote the book and titled it Don't Hold Back because I feel like we as a church have been trying to go there, and I want to encourage other brothers and sisters in Christ, like, let's go there. Let's not hold back from experiencing all that. What a unique time and place for us to be in, to see the beauty of the biblical gospel in a way maybe we've not seen in a long time. And so anyway, the way I define the American gospel, or would talk about it, is just that I think we've exchanged a biblical gospel that exalts Jesus above everything in this world for an American gospel that prostitutes Jesus for the sake of comfort and power and politics and prosperity in our country. And I think that exchange that has happened is the reason why we experience all kinds of the discouragement and disillusionment that we've seen. And I'm glad to dive into all the effects. Yeah,
let's dive into that. I want to go there. Like comfort, you said comfort. I wrote some notes. Comfort, power, prosperity, and politics. So are those sort of the major categories that you're looking at?
Well, I would say, in a sense, big umbrella, but then, okay, so diving in and how this plays out. Instead of being eager to unite around Jesus, we have been quick to divide over what I would call idolatry of personal and political convictions. So that's one area that I think we need to talk about. Then another area, like, instead of enjoying the multi-ethnic beauty that Jesus has made possible for us in the church in a way that's different from any other community in the world, like, we are still on a whole segregating by the color of our skin. So I think we need to talk about that. Instead of, like, I'm not for loosening convictions around what is most important in the word, i.e. the gospel at the core of God's word. But there's a way to hold on to God's word with conviction and actually share it with compassion. Like, it's water for friends in a desert instead of like a weapon we're using in a culture war. So I think we need to talk about how do you have compassionate conviction, and then dive into, I think we get all caught up in debating justice, and we're not doing justice in the way God has called us to do. In a world of injustice around us, we're spending all this time debating justice. And I'm all for defining justice biblically, but then what does that look like in our lives? And then to dive into what does this mean for us to live not for the prosperity of our nation, but for the proclamation of the gospel in all nations. And that should change the way we operate as the church. And then the last kind of major area that I walk through is the tendency we have to view God as a means to an end instead of being the end, like a Psalm 27 for. I think, again, part of the reason why we have seen what we've seen in the church is because we've used God as a means to a variety of ends instead of him being the end, the one thing we are seeking, the one thing I want. I just want to see you and know you, and I want to do that with others. So yeah, a lot to dive into there, but those are kind of the main thrusts of and the main issues that I think we need to address.
Well, I'd love to go there, and I'm taking notes. I want to drill down on that. Let me ask a backup question to get us started, though. How did we get here? Because, we were talking about when Radical was released, you were sort of attacking the idea of the American dream replacing the gospel, et cetera. But I read 1776 by David McCullough a couple of years ago, And when you look at the issues that faced America in 1776, there were debates about women's equality. There were debates about slavery, obviously. There were debates about freedom and happiness and the right to bear arms and the role of government. And the more I read that, 400, 500, 600-page book, the more I kind of realized, wow, nothing's changed in America in 270 years or whatever, 260, my math's off, but 50. Is it? I don't know. 250 years. Math was not my strong suit. Anyway, over 2 centuries, very little has changed. So when you look at that, and yet saying that, it feels like there's been an intensification in the last decade of all of those issues that maybe they were a little more latent in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, but in the 2010s and 2020s, the chickens have come home to roost and it's like, it seems to have intensified. Or is that a misreading of it?
No, I definitely think there's been intensification of a variety of things. And I would say I'm no expert on all the social trends that we've experienced over the past 10, 15 years, whether from social media to just the amount of time we interact on screens and through devices and how the effect of that change and then add on top of that COVID. And so it feels like we've layered onto some of those issues a lack of ability, particularly in the church. So this is where I'm not an expert, but I know more just as pastoring a local church, the ability to sit down and walk through these things with our Bibles open, with humility, with understanding, and a spirit of prayer and fasting together. Like that's not the way the world operates. And I feel like we've been caught up in the way the world operates in addressing these issues. So yes, I think a lot of the issues are the same. I mean, that's part of the challenge, right? That yes, 250 years later, why are we still talking about this? Why are we still segregating by the color of our skin in church? Like what is behind that? Like what? And so a lot of those issues are the same. How we address those issues has been, I think, what has been in many ways discouraging over the last few years is the lack of ability to, with humility. I mean, when we as a church in May, June 2020, so this was after COVID had just come about a few months before, then George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, we walked through, opened our Bibles together with hundreds of people in our church and just said, we're going to fast, we're going to pray, we're going to look at what the gospel is, we're going to look at what the church is, how we operate as a church, and then we're going to look at biblically what justice and race, how does the Bible address these issues? But I found that even trying to do that, and especially because at that point in light of COVID, we were doing it via screens, it was really hard to get the church to have good, humble, meaningful dialogue along those lines. So I think how we address those issues has really been shown to be found wanting over the last few years.
Well, I am still trying to figure out. It's funny, I was thinking about it recently because, I travel a lot and every state handled COVID differently and every country handled COVID differently. But I'm wondering how that became a political issue, like an ideological issue. And you're right, like sitting down and praying and fasting and talking about Ahmaud Arbery and racial justice has become a political issue, which is really interesting. Any insights on like why everything is so politicized these days?
It's certainly the water we're swimming in. I mean, this is the polarization of politics. I mean, it's all around us. And that's where I feel like we are missing an opportunity to show the beautiful distinction that happens in the body of Christ, to not get caught up in that. Now, to be clear, like I'm all for letting the Bible inform our politics. So yes, I mean, we want the Bible to inform every part of our lives. And so our theology should inform how we think about political issues, but it should also inform the way we interact in the political arena. It should also inform the way we interact with people and love people around us, like our theology informs that. And our theology is, as followers of Jesus, like the first chapter in the book is why I try to dive in here, because there are things we hold on to, first order issues, and then there are political convictions that should not divide us that we will come to different conclusions on. And so that's where I think we've looked to those things to unite us when they were never intended to unite us. Jesus is the only one who's intended to unite us. Jesus, his word, what's most clear, most direct in his word, that's what brings us together, not convictions that we may even be very passionate about, but that's not what unites us. And that's where even in the church, I'm saying in our church, we have engaged in those conversations about those things without fear, because we're not looking to those things to unite us. We are holding on to Jesus to bring us together. I think about our church, like we have over 100 different countries represented in our church family. I have no hope of uniting this church around perspectives and positions on a number of different issues. And I'm okay with that. I don't expect everybody to agree with what I think about all these things. And I'm not going to agree with everybody else, but we are going to hold fast to Jesus and the gospel. That's what I'm saying. So what is the biblical gospel that actually does hold us together, that we do unite around in a way that supersedes a variety of different convictions we may hold passionately in the political arena?
So, I want to drill down on the issues you've raised, but let's ask this question then, because this is occurring to me. You had the same conversations that so many church and business leaders had, whether that was on their executive team about masks versus no masks, what to say about racial justice, what to do about racial justice. You had all the issues that everyone else has had over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Is there a different way, or how was your approach different? Because when I talk to pastors, they're still licking their wounds. There's not even a scab there, like they're moments away from tears when I think about the division on their board or on their staff team, or the people who left or the people who didn't. And on the one hand, we want to pretend that's all in the past because it's 2023 now. On the other hand, the scabs haven't healed the wound at this point either. So was there a different approach that you tried, or did you run into the same landmines that everyone else ran into? I'm just curious, because I really agree with your premise. It's very, extremely difficult to do, David, as you know. I mean, that's why you wrote the book.
Yeah. And this is where you're starting to get me close to tears, Carey, because it's been really hard. And we've been in it. Like when I was mentioning to you right before we started recording, like when I got a copy of this book, it was just like, it was overwhelming when I first got the first copy, because there was so much. There's so much there, so much life, so much hurt, pain. Like that's where. So I don't think we've been immune to that. I mean, whether it's been all kinds of headlines in the Washington Post in ways that are unhelpful, or slander, and just back and forth and division, and some people leaving the church that I sincerely grieve over, and still wrestle with how to process through a variety of those things. So all that to say, but I've kept pressing in because I believe Jesus and the gospel is worth it. I believe there's something more beautiful at the end of this. And that's where I'm so thankful for brothers and sisters in Christ who along the way over the last couple of years have been in my life and just said, hey, keep going, don't hold back, in a sense. And that's part of why I wanted to write this book, is just to say to others who have been through that, who are still, either the wounds are, however fresh or scabbed over they might be, there's wounds are deep. And to say, hey, we're in this together. Like, we're in this together, and he is worth it. And we have an opportunity. I genuinely believe we have an opportunity to experience and see more beauty than we've ever imagined. When I think about in our church family, when I think about church groups that have formed over the last couple of years, where if you were to look at these people and you were to see them anywhere else in the world, they would not, I mean, their backgrounds, their perspectives, their politics are totally different, but they've got their Bibles open together. It's beautiful. The only explanation for why they're in the same room, sharing life with each other, loving each other like they are, is because of the cross and resurrection of Jesus. That's the only explanation for it. And that's what I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of that kind of distinct community, but it's not easy getting there.
Yeah. So let's talk about, let me see. I'm just looking at my notes here. Oh yeah, the idolatry of personal and political convictions. Can we start there? Because it feels like the whole thing's about idolatry, and I agree. I mean, it was Calvin who said the human heart is a factory of idols. You kill one, you produce another. I think that's true. But I think this personal and political convictions, what do you mean by the idolatry of those two things?
I mean, elevating those things above Jesus and that which is most clear and direct in his word. So, as an example, there was one Sunday in late 2020 when I said, we as a church are not going to divide over who you vote for in this election. If you think we should divide over that, then this is probably not the best church for you. And we would encourage you to be in a Bible-believing, gospel-preaching church that shares that conviction if you think. So here's what's behind that. And this is when I dive into the first chapter of the book is like, okay, I've got 3 buckets in my mind. The first bucket being the gospel, that which is clear and direct in God's word that all Christians, followers of Jesus, hold on to. Then I've got a second bucket in my mind that brings us together in local churches. And I realize there's different Christians who have different convictions about baptism than I do, or church leadership and church government than I do. And I don't expect everybody in Metro Washington, D.C. to be a part of the church that I pastor. Like, no way. Like, we have different ideas, and I'm glad to unite with many other brothers and sisters across the city for the spread of the gospel in the city who have a variety of different convictions on secondary issues. And then third bucket issues would be issues where we agree to disagree even in the church. And so we said, we're putting how you vote in an election, in a presidential election, in the third bucket. And if you think it should be in the second bucket, then I actually thought, though, I genuinely thought that was not a controversial statement to say that this is way down. And there were people who passionately disagreed about that third bucket in our church, and they stayed in our church. There were some who said, okay, that I'm gonna be somewhere else. But I don't think it's wise, biblical for us to elevate how you vote in a presidential election to the level of the substitutionary atonement of Jesus. Like, it's not even close. So I want Jesus to be supreme in the church more than I want anybody to be president. And so that would be an example of where I think we have idolized some of those convictions. I think Romans 14 and 15 is so helpful for us here because we're not the first to experience different passionate convictions. And I love the way Paul in that passage says, like, basically hold on to those convictions strongly. He doesn't say even ease up on your convictions. He's like, hold your convictions strongly, but don't try to unite around him. Unite around Jesus. So that's what I want to encourage people to have strong convictions about, all kinds of things, but realize where those convictions are in perspective to the gospel.
So somebody comes up to you after a message like that and says, David, I hear you, but that's the wrong bucket. Like, who you vote for in a presidential election is not a third bucket issue. It's a second or it's a first. What do you say to them?
So I would say, I disagree with that. And I would say, here's why. Where do you see in Scripture, so that's where I'm going to, where do you see in Scripture that this is a third, but this is a primary issue that every follower of Jesus must agree on? And then I would also say, just on a practical level, it would be good to sit around with some other brothers and sisters in Christ who may have different perspectives than you on that, and just ask and really humbly try to understand where they're coming from, why they would come to a different conclusion. And I think that would help in discerning, okay, is this person actually not, if you're putting in the first bucket, are you going to say this person is not a follower of Jesus after you've listened to them share that? I'm not going to say that. And I don't think we as the church should say that. If you think it's in a second bucket issue, then I and the leaders of our church disagree with that. And so I would encourage you to find a church where that's a second bucket issue. If that's what you think unites together in a local church, you can't be in a local church with people who believe differently than you on that, then again, this is not going to be the church for you. But I would encourage you to not miss out on at least sitting down with some brothers and sisters in Christ who have some different perspectives on you than you do, and seek to understand where they're coming from.
So I don't disagree with you. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, David. But do you have any theories on why, in the minds of many people, this is just not a handful of people, but like meaningful percentages, perhaps even a majority of Christians, I don't know, I don't have any data around that, who you vote for or who you identify with politically and ideologically has become a first or second bucket issue? Like why has that all of a sudden become such a big deal and so defining for so many people?
Well, I think much of it has to do with the political, cultural climate we are swimming in, as we kind of already talked about. Two, I think that we are in most of our churches, we are around people who look like us and think like us. And so that's how we view Christianity in ways that church leaders, I would say, have contributed to. I mean, when I think about church growth, the whole model in many ways has been built on what's called a homogeneous unit principle, right? That if you want to reach people with the gospel fast, then reach people who look like a certain person and fit this certain demographic, and then have a different church for different demographic people. And that's what we've done ethnically, and it's what we've done politically. And so and all kinds of different, preferentially even. So we split into different churches. And I just don't think there's biblical basis for that. I think there could have been a case made in the first century that the gospel would have spread faster among Jews if the Gentiles were not causing problems in the church like they were, or Gentiles, it would have spread faster if they didn't have to deal with all these Jewish people who were having all these hangups. But there's a zeal to bring Jewish and Gentile people together around the gospel. So all that to say, I think this is the church culture we've been swimming in. We have condition ourselves to be in communities of faith, in bodies of Christ, local churches that look like us and think like us, where we are not around the table meaningfully sharing life with people who would have different opinions and convictions on some of these things that would cause us to realize maybe that isn't a first bucket thing. Maybe that's a second bucket, or maybe it's a third bucket issue.
So feel free to disagree, but one of the trends that I'm watching and have written a little bit about is the politicization of church. So I think one of the poorly kept secrets now is if you really want to grow your church fast, and there's a lot of church leaders who would love to grow their church fast after COVID, the way to do that is to take a clear political position. In other words, and mostly it happens on the right. So it's like, we're a Republican church. Here's what we believe. We're anti-woke. We're anti-this. And those churches are filling up super fast right now. Now, I have about 1,000 problems with that, but it is a fast ticket to church growth. I think it was The Atlantic wrote a post about that in late 2022. There have been others on the outside looking in who are like, yeah, if you are willing to do that, you will grow your church quickly. I'd love for you to comment on that and then play out some of the challenges that you see associated with that kind of approach to church growth.
Well, I think so. In light of what we were just talking about with like homogeneous unit principle, I think that's been true, I would say, for decades, and it's been intensified now. And so, yes, try to reach this type of person with this type of message, and you will draw a crowd. And I would agree. I think it's on both sides, kind of the right and the left, in a sense. Yeah. Under the banner of
progressives have done that too.
Gospel believing, yeah. Even under the banner of gospel believing, Bible preaching Christianity, you've got different. But there's, I I would say there are points where that goes too far and kind of goes outside the bounds of even Bible believing and gospel preaching. But that's kind of the point. But I would say, so the challenges or problems with that, I don't see biblical basis for reaching one type of person. Two, I see biblical basis for people from very different perspectives and backgrounds and even convictions being together in the body of Christ, and actually being willing to sacrifice certain preferences, or being willing to welcome. I think that's the language that Romans 15 uses. Welcome your brother or sister in Christ, to please your brother and sister in Christ who has different convictions than you. I think God is actually calling us to a deeper level of selflessness in the church that's willing to lay down some of those things, those convictions that we hold on to, not to say I don't have those convictions, but to say I'm willing to be in the body of Christ and to build up a brother or sister in Christ who believes very differently from me. And I don't think they need to be in a different church. Until we make some of those steps, I think we'll continue to segregate by the color of our skin. I think we'll continue to segregate really by a host of different worldly factors instead of uniting together around the gospel. The last thing I would say is it's beautiful when it happens in the church, when you see brothers and sisters in Christ who look and think very different from each other together around the word, loving Jesus on their faces together in prayer, caring for each other, bearing with each other. I mean, we wouldn't have that command to bear with each other if there didn't,
if you didn't,
we didn't have to do that. Like if that wasn't expected, being patient with each other, eager to maintain unity when there's challenges to you, that should be a part of the body. And it's beautiful when it happens. That's part of what I'm wanting to say in this book. Like, it's worth it. It's Jesus' vision for the church. This is what heaven's going to look like. This is what heaven's going to involve: the nations, the tribes, the peoples of the world, diversity, Revelation 7, 9, and 10, in a beautiful way. And so why are we not cultivating community on earth like it's going to be in heaven to the extent with which it's possible here?
So I want to play that out a little bit. You raise generational tension. Is that like that idea for homogeneity? Everybody looks like me, same background, votes the same way, same socioeconomic level. Is that a boomer and Gen X thing? Does Gen Z, do younger millennials think differently about that? Like, if you play out the church over the next decade, where do you think that homogenous idea of the church goes? And then where does your vision of the church end up, say, by 2032, 2033?
I would say, and obviously much of this is contingent on context. Like if someone is listening to this and they're a part of a church where everybody in the entire community looks the same and thinks the same, like comes from the same background, like it's not like, okay, we're not experiencing biblical Christianity, but to the extent with which we have the opportunity to build community across a variety of different lines of this world it's superseded by Jesus. So I just want to make that caveat. So the extent with which we're able to do that, I'm convinced if this is God's desire for us, it's going to be good for us in all generations. I do think there is it's part of why I wrote in the very beginning of this book, like, this is for the next generation who I think longs to see more of Christ. I want to see more of Jesus. I want them to see that there's a difference in the Bible, that they don't need to disengage from the church, because the church is so much more beautiful than anything this world offers. And the reason why they're in some ways tempted to disengage from the church is because the church is looking like the world, but that's not God's design for the church. And so I do think we are, in one of the chapters, I try to, flesh that out more. Like, we are hurting our witness to the next generation with the way we're handling the Bible and dividing in the church, and over things that are not primary or secondary even. So I think we're hurting the next generation, but I would say that affects every generation. And the last thing I would just mention, there's, no matter what generation we're in, tendency in us to prioritize what we want what feels best to us, what we prefer, what feels most comfortable to us. And we need to all remind ourselves, whether it's Gen Z or a boomer, like we've been all called to deny ourselves, like to lay down our preferences, to build up others, to love others as ourselves. And that's going to look like laying down preferences and desires that you have for this or that in order to build up others. But this is what makes us followers of Jesus in the first place.
Do you think the challenges we've been talking about are also fueling some of the deconversion we're seeing and the trends in church decline? And if so, can you talk about that a little bit, David?
Yeah, I would say when I see people, well, my mind was going one direction. I'm going to go actually two different directions, because I do think that there are some people who see the offense of the gospel, the biblical offense of the gospel, and what the Bible teaches about hot button issues in our culture, and are saying, I don't believe that. I believe the world over God's word. I don't. And so are rebelling against the offense of the gospel, and that will always be there. And so I see that. What grieves me is when people would say, I'm deconstructing or deconverting or just leaving the church, leaving Jesus, but what they're leaving is a picture of Jesus in the church that was not biblical in the first place, that was not right, good. And so that's why I'm eager to say, let's step into this moment. There's a clear vacuum. As long as we are showing the world a picture of the church that reflects the world, then of course that will be disillusioning and disengaging to all kinds of people. But when we show like the distinction that Jesus and the gospel create in a beautiful way, in a way that astounds Ephesians 3, like astounds even, all in the spiritual realm. Like, yes, the manifold wisdom of God in his design for the church. Let's show that. And I'm convinced that will be attractive. The offense of the gospel will still be there, but that will be attractive like nothing else in this world can be.
I agree with you on that. I think that a decade from now, the church that will remain and be ascendant will be much more like the church you describe than a lot of what we're seeing today. But back to that other issue then, a lot of people might say, well, the whole idea of the scandal of the cross. I hear a lot of people who might, if they think the third bucket issues. So give us a couple of examples of other third bucket issues. Like what are, in your mind, third bucket issues?
Well, certainly, I would put there, I said certainly, I said certainly, but I was like, well, obviously the challenge is it's not certainly in a lot of people's minds. So things I would put there, certainly how you vote. Well, I would put theological issues like end times, theological issues like, I would even say some, and this is where some would put it in second bucket, third bucket. But when it comes to the spiritual gifts, some would put those in a second bucket, some would put those in a third bucket. I would say in our church family, we have a variety of different people with different understandings of spiritual gifts. And so it would be closer to a third bucket issue. But then I would say certainly convictions over, all right. Yeah. Here's a good one. I'm trying to be really careful with my words.
Take your time.
There are issues of how we apply God's word about justice to the culture around us, to the politics around us, that are going to be areas where believers in our church, genuine brothers and sisters in Christ, are going to disagree. Like we had a group recently that was walking through some of those kinds of issues, and they are sitting around sharing passionately about, their understanding or thoughts about everything from criminal justice to economic growth. And, those would be just a couple issues where they were really, we're in Metro Washington, D.C. We got a variety of people who are really passionate about those things, and not just here, and even to the point of tears, sharing, okay, I really believe strongly about this, But then in the end, they are and then disagreeing. But in the end, this is not what makes us a church. And we have actually, we feel built up in Christ to be able to share who we genuinely are as brothers and sisters in Christ and how we feel about some of these things with each other, to be heard and still to have, I would argue actually, to have deeper community together as a result of that conversation. So, yeah, those are some things that would come to mind. I think where I've been personally challenged is, well, one of our pastors, Mike Kelsey, he put it this way, and Mike grew up, his dad is a pastor in the district, and he grew up in African-American context his entire life. And he would say, the way he's put it is, I and others often feel like, even in a multi-ethnic church, feel like a welcomed guest, where it's almost like a bed and breakfast, where we're free to enjoy the bed and eat the meal, but it's not our pictures on the wall. We don't set the menu. We're welcomed guests in this place. And when he shared that, it was really eye-opening for me. And then we sat down, I mentioned earlier, we went through a journey with hundreds of people and thinking about the gospel, church, justice, and race. And we asked all kinds of questions in that journey. People were giving feedback. And we asked, have you experienced any challenges being in our church and because of your ethnicity, or in light of that relate in any way to your ethnicity? And I can't remember, I've got it in the book, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was somewhere around 80-something% of white brothers and sisters said no challenges. And then it was over 90% of African-American brothers and sisters that said we faced challenges. And similarly among Hispanic, Native American, and other. And so that was eye-opening for me to realize, okay, like I need to realize that I'm putting some things that are third bucket in my mind, they feel second bucket to some people in our church, in a way that I need to make sure there's room as a pastor for people to have different perspectives on some of those different things that are third bucket issues. And I need to make sure there's a lot that goes with that, because Mike would say he feels most like a welcomed guest when it comes to issues of justice and the way those are expressed in the church, because oftentimes a couple of certain issues are highlighted, and these issues over here that are concerning to others are not highlighted. And when the Bible speaks to both of them. So there's a lot more we could talk about there. But I would say in the end, I've been humbled, I've been challenged. I'm a different person after leading in this church alongside brothers and sisters in Christ who are very different from me. And I don't think I would love the word any less. I don't think I love the gospel any less. Now that it's been part of the accusations along the way, but I love the Lord and his word and the gospel more as a result of experiencing the body of Christ in these ways.
Part of the challenge, I think, David, is that there are people who would say, and I've seen this all over the place, and perhaps been guilty of this myself, these third bucket issues are the first bucket issue. And we say people are offended by the gospel, and that's why they're walking away. But they're actually not. They're offended by us. They're offended by third bucket issues. How do you help someone see that might be the case? Because I think we're all suffering from a case of blindness, because our issue, how you vote, what you believe about justice, what you believe about racial equality, what you believe about, pick your issue, political issue, the Supreme Court, abortion or whatever, that is the gospel. That is now substituting for the gospel. So, for leaders who may be either themselves unaware that a third bucket in their mind has become the gospel, or for those who are trying to help people see that, hey, this isn't like a first bucket issue. This isn't like the death and resurrection of Jesus. This is third bucket. How do you help people see that and get over what perhaps might be their blindness?
I really think the key is getting together in the same room, around the same table. There's a sense in which this is what we should be doing every Sunday around the table and in worship, and seeing the bread and the cup and the body and the blood, and realizing, oh, this is precious and supreme, and a lot of other things kind of fade in the background around this. But I would say, so I have seen this over and over again when people are willing to get around with their Bibles open and start with, all right, the gospel. What do we believe about the gospel? And be like, okay, we're on the same page there. And the church, what do we believe about the church? We believe the church loves each other, cares for each other, bears with each other, listens to each other, laments with each other, humbles ourselves before each other. So what do we believe about the church? This is who we're going to be together. So all right, we're holding on to the gospel. This is who we are as the church. Now let's talk about fill in the blank, criminal justice reform. Let's talk about who you vote for as president. Let's talk about how to address the picture of abortion in our country. Let's talk about and just fill in the blank, how to address poverty. And okay, you share this perspective. You share this. How did you get there from the Word? How did you get there in light of the Word, your experiences in life, this or that? And then to be able to share that. And then you've already got the foundation around the gospel. You're understanding this is what it means to be the church, and then you're diving into that. I've seen over and over again that conversation lead to beautiful places, and people saying, I feel heard. I feel like others understand me. I don't think they agree with me, and I don't expect them to, because I don't agree with them. But we love Jesus, and we're gonna share the gospel together. I think the other part of that is, let's lift our eyes to for us in Metro DC, millions of people around us who don't know this gospel. I was just preaching this last Sunday on the reality of an eternal hell. And it's so interesting. Right after Jesus, at the end of Mark 9, it stuck out big time to me. At the end of Mark 9, he's just talked about hell where the worm doesn't die and the fire's not quenched, like unquenchable fire. These are the words that Jesus uses to describe hell. And then he closes, he says, and be at peace with one another. And it's like, where did that come from? And I'm sitting there just meditating on it, thinking, well, of course, if our eternity is secure, then we do not need to be fighting with each other. We need to be working together to get this good news to people around us who don't have a secure eternity. And all the more with 3 billion people in the world who've never even heard the gospel. What are we doing? And I think our perspective changes, not just when we take that time as brothers and sisters in Christ, but when we turn together and look at people who are desperately in need of Jesus, and their eternity hinges on hearing it from us. That changes our perspective as well.
So let's talk about the multi-ethnic church, the multi-ethnic beauty of the church, and the racial tensions and injustices we're seeing around us. You also really identify that as being a problem in the church these days. Can you say more about that, David?
Yeah, I have a lot I could say about that. How do I summarize it? Well, in the book, I try to dive into, one, the racial disparities that are undeniably present in the United States, and then the racial division that has existed in the United States for centuries now. Ever since slavery, we have divided into different churches based on our skin color, and we're still doing it today. Instead of countering this racial divide with the gospel, we're actually perpetuating it. And I trust that we all hate racism and slavery and Jim Crow laws in history. So how can we be content then when so many churches and seminaries and mission organizations and Christian conferences today look like time capsules preserving the division of the past? Surely it's time to turn that tide. And so what is that going to look like for us as followers of Jesus and for our churches. That's where the church that I pastor has taught me and changed me. I have so much to learn, and I have learned so much. I just think about being at a meeting recently with leaders in our church, and I'm looking over at the table, and there's women and men from Sri Lanka and Cameroon and South Korea. There's people born in China and Colombia and the US and Haiti. And then I'm looking around, even those who were born in the US. Like, I see black, white, brown faces. I see many people who grew up in environments like I did, where everybody looked like them and thought like them. And to see this picture of brothers and sisters in Christ and leaders in the church. So and that's important, because it's not just as followers of Jesus, but to the extent in which possible to cultivate that kind of Revelation 7, 9, and 10 kind of diversity among leaders in the church, and to see all these brothers and sisters who are willingly facing challenges and making sacrifices in order to experience uniquely countercultural, gospel-shaped family in the church. Like, don't we want to be a part of that to the extent possible, where we live to work intentionally? And I say that specifically from my perspective, and I could give all the caveats here, so would give the caveats. Like, I'm not saying I should feel guilty for being white, that I should feel guilty for sins in the past of people who look like me. But as someone who, the people who've gone before me who look like me have not just ignored injustice, but have actually contributed to and led the way in injustice. And not just people, but pastors, church leaders. I should be all the more zealous to work as intentionally and wisely and work as hard as possible to turn that tide and to bring down walls of division and be a part of cultivating a more beautiful picture of the church than we've experienced in American history. Like, what an opportunity we have to do that today. And I just want to step fully into it. I believe we must step fully into it, because Jesus came to make this possible for us. And so tons more could be said there. Even the one chapter in the book I have on this, and it comes out in other chapters as well, but is very insufficient to really think through racial disparities and the reasons behind those, and even disagreements people have about the reasons behind those, and then racial division in the church and how to overcome that. And I'm just saying in this book, and would say even now, like, let's be zealous to cultivate the multi-ethnic beauty that Jesus has made possible for us in the church today in a way that would turn the tides on centuries of division, specifically in my country.
Let's talk about culture wars. What other elements of the culture wars are playing out in the church these days?
Well, I would say that sexuality is a major issue in our culture. And there's all kinds of political battles associated with that. There are all kinds of personal struggles associated with that in homes and in public schools. And I mean, so it is affecting so many parts of life. So what I'm arguing for in this book is the Bible does speak really clearly and counterculturally about sexuality. And I've written about that in books in the past, about man and woman and the beauty of man and woman created in the image of God, and marriage and sexuality. So I want to be super clear about those truths. At the same time, I want to be super compassionate toward people who have different views, have different perspectives, have a variety of different struggles. And I'm convinced there are ways that we can, as the church, show that kind of compassion in greater ways while holding on to our conviction. And one of the things I do in the end of the book, and just on a personal level, just trying to help people think, okay, practically, what does this look like? Like, find somebody who would think that Christians really don't like them, or would have a negative view of Christians, and go out of your way to love, care for, share life, hear their story, share your story, like be involved in their lives in a way that shows the honor of Jesus, the love of Jesus, the care of Jesus, and of course, share the gospel of Jesus in the process. But let's go out of our way to make sure. When I think 1 Peter chapter 2, honor everybody. Do the people who disagree with us in the culture wars, do they see that we honor them? And I think many times that's not what we're communicating.
How would you respond to the comment, we shouldn't be talking about justice, we shouldn't be talking about all of these things, we should just preach the gospel? I see that on social so often. I see that in my DMs. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I would say there was a time when I believed that. I think specifically, I'll take the issue of abortion, for example. I would have been like, I never talked about abortion as a pastor. And that's when I was convicted one day reading Psalm 139. Wait a minute. God talks about children in his image in the womb. This is a biblical issue far before it's a political issue. And so I started preaching from Psalm 139 and similar texts about the value of children in the womb and the need to care for them. And what's interesting is when I did that, and ever since I did that, I didn't get the pushback, stop talking about issues of justice, just preach the gospel. Instead, the pushback has come far more when talking about issues of race or care for the poor and the oppressed. And now there's been a lot more pushback. But I think the Bible speaks really clearly about some of these other things too. But that just goes back to how I've picked and chosen between different issues that I'm going to address from God's word in ways that I don't have the right to do. And we don't have the right to do as pastors or leaders in the church or followers of Jesus for that matter. So all that to say, to the extent with which the Bible addresses an issue, and justice is all over the Bible, oppression all over the Bible, widows and orphans and strangers in your midst all over the Bible. So we need to talk about these things because God talks about these things. And there's a way to talk about these things while holding fast to the gospel, not leaving the gospel behind in some kind of journey into, okay, we don't proclaim the gospel or we elevate certain issues above the supremacy of Jesus. No, that's kind of the whole point. But to the extent with which the Bible speaks, we need to speak as leaders in the church, and the extent with which the Bible speaks, we need to follow as children of God. So all that to say, I want to preach the gospel and do justice because, well, that's what's required of us, Micah 6:8.
Yeah. So you've got 6 steps to a different future. Feel free to touch on some of them, all of them, whatever. What's a way forward here?
I'm careful to say, I don't think there's a simple solution. There's not a silver bullet here, but I do think there are some practical things we can do. One is to, like we talked about, cultivate community on earth as it is in heaven. Like, how can we intentionally pursue? And so I just kind of walk through some practical steps to intentionally pursue multi-ethnic community as the body of Christ, no matter what context you're in. And then, so another thing, instead of seeking God as a means to an end, what would it look like for us to seek God as the end? And I just walk through some of the things we've done as a church family to spend hours all night, some nights in prayer together, and not gathering together to hear a sermon. Obviously, it's good. It's good to hear from God's word through human instruments. Not gathering together to hear this band or this, but just gathering together. Psalm 27. We just want to seek God, and we're going to seek Him all night long for hours and hours at a time together. And He's going to be the end that we're seeing. So what does that look like in our lives, our churches? I think one of the things I dive into practically there is turning our attention to 3 billion people in the world who have little to no knowledge of the gospel. Like, we have not been called to live for the prosperity of one nation. We've been called to live for the proclamation of the gospel to all the nations. And if there's 3 billion people who have little to no knowledge of Jesus right now, we should be talking about that all the time. That should be consuming us. That should change the way we're praying. It should change the way we're giving. It should change the way we're going and sending in our churches. Like, we should be talking all the time, not about making a nation great. It's about making Jesus great among the nations. Like, this should be driving us. And in a way that I kind of walk through, it's like I can quantitatively show it's not happening. That's not where our focus is. So those are just a few of the practical things. I think there's 3 or 4 others that I dive into, but there are, again, I think we have opportunities, even to take that last one. That's where I hope people walk away from this book, and maybe even hopefully this conversation, like, and church culture that has been discouraging in many ways, encouraged. Like, there's so much opportunity we have. What a unique time and place to be in, where we have more opportunities to spread the gospel among the nations than ever before in history, Carey. Like, Paul could have only dreamed about the technology we have, the ease of travel, the globalization of the marketplace, the opportunities for us to get from a device in our phones. We could do what he never could have even dreamed of. And it's, a device in our pockets, like, it's right there. So all that to say, we have opportunities today to be a part of the beauty of following Jesus and the church in ways far beyond what we've dreamed, if we'll be willing to not hold back from stepping into some of these issues.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share?
On a personal level, and I share some of this in the book, actually share more about it, but I'll just make it quick. Like, Heather and I, my wife and I, were on a date one night, and we were talking about a lot of the challenges we've been walking through, and it was a low point. And but I looked at her and I said, "Babe, I can honestly say that I know God more, and I love God more, and I trust God more now than I did 2 or 3 years ago." And I looked at her and I said, "I guess if God is the goal, then these are great days." And that's the good news of the gospel, isn't it, Carey? Like, God is the goal. And so that's what's driving me now. It's what's driven me to write this book. What I would want to say to every listener, like, he's worth it. Like, so even when it's hard, even when it's costly, when he's the goal, when he's the reward, then it's worth it. So I hope we can be encouraged and not hold back from following him with everything in us, confident that he's worth it.
As you've changed the dialogue at your church, and I know we're talking before the book has been released, so, wait and see. What price do you pay for this message? What are the barbs coming at you? What's the pushback? Because I think there's a lot of people who would want to go there, but they're really afraid to go there, because they're like, well, if I start putting these issues in the third bucket, we're going to lose 50% of our church. I'm going to have so many angry emails. It's just easier to play the game.
Yes.
What price do you pay?
All the above. Like, I would say, there's personal cost. I mean, I won't go into all the details that I don't in the book, but some of the things on a personal level that, there's cost in your life, in your family. And then I would say in the church, not everybody will go. And I don't ever view that lightly, or go with you. So I don't view that lightly. I want to shepherd people well. And then slander, accusations of all sorts, from all sorts of directions, misunderstood, and Oh man, this is
Yeah. So what
it's
happens
heavy.
inside you
Thinking
when
about.
you get slandered, when you get misunderstood? Like, how do you process that stuff and not let it lead to you throwing in the towel, shutting up, or just saying, it's just easier not to push back?
Well, it's definitely tempting to do all the above that you just mentioned, throwing the towel, step back. How not to? I would say, I mean, this is going to sound so basic, but it's without question, the first thing that comes to my mind is like time before the Lord every morning when you wake up, the audience of one saying, I just want to be faithful to you. I just want to be faithful to you. I just want to be faithful to you, and clinging to his word. I don't want to be, I don't want to not be preaching God's word. I don't want to be loosening my grip on the gospel. So if people are saying that, like, I want to make sure I'm not doing that. And so to press in all the more. And I think it's good to have obviously wise counselors in your life who you can say, hey, is this true? Like, am I doing this or that? And so to have people, not just people who will tell you what you want to hear, but people who will be honest with you, and by God's grace, from my wife to others in my life, I think that's true. And I need those people in my life. But when I'm meeting with the Lord, walking in step with his Spirit, and getting good counsel along the way, holding fast to his word, hiding his word in my heart, memorizing his word, fasting, whatever, like all those spiritual disciplines we know to do, abiding in him, then there's a strength and peace and comfort and boldness and courage. That's what I pray for all the time, Carey. I pray for wisdom and courage. Because I don't want one of those without the other, right? I don't want to be wise and timid, like know what to do and afraid to do it. And I don't want to be, foolish and courageous. That's really bad. So I pray all the time for wisdom and courage, and to trust the Lord. Like trust that he sees, he knows, his justice will reign in the end. I think about one brother in Christ who's one of those sources of wise counsel in me. He's like, David, I think you just need to lower your expectations for this world. And I think that's a good word. I think I don't need to have too high expectations for this world. And it's been so encouraging too, reading the Bible in a fresh way. Like, it's not like Paul was not walking through these things. I mean, he's like saying over and over again, I am not lying. Do this, like, hear me, like this. And so it's like, well, I signed up for this. We signed up for this as followers of Jesus, and all the more so as leaders in the church. We signed up for this. And again, going back to that, what Heather and I were talking about on date night, there's a depth. Maybe I would summarize it this way. When you're in a dry time, a hard time, and you find yourself having to dig a well deeper, like the water's just not coming as quickly as maybe as it comes in really sweet times, like you dig a deeper and deeper and deeper well, but you find a water to depth you haven't found it before. There's a purity and a sweetness and a refreshing nature of that water that is not always found when it was just easy to find.
Well, I'll tell you, the book is called Don't Hold Back. I'm so glad you didn't. I'm so glad you went there. We need this conversation. I think if we take it seriously, we're going to get healthier and better and stronger as a church and as people of faith in the world trying to figure out, how to navigate it. So the book's available everywhere. It's called Don't Hold Back. If people want to track with you online these days, easiest place to do that, David?
Would be radical.net. And can I mention one other thing, Carey? I know you were totally closing this out, and you're closing out.
No.
But I just want to mention one other thing, because I think about our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world. I think they beckon us to not hold back. I mean, yes, these last couple of years have been challenging. Then I think about friends of mine in Afghanistan who are not holding back, and they could die tomorrow because they're not holding back, and they're following Jesus at great cost. Like I want to press on alongside them. And what I'm walking through, it doesn't even compare with some of the things they're walking through. So I would just add that the global body of Christ beckons us not to hold back.
That's incredible wisdom and motivation, and a great place to end things. David, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's mutual, Carey. Thanks.
It's a completely different experience when you see it face to face. Being able to see how a child and how families are taken care of through what happens within the context of the local church, and seeing how compassion comes alongside local churches to empower them to make a difference.
One of the significant things that compassion has done in the life of our church is inspire people to understand that the gospel, the real gospel, requires justice and it requires mercy.
Our partnership with Compassion International has just taken our external focus to a new level as a church, which I felt God wanted us to have. And there is an energy in our congregation about making a difference on the other side of the world.
At the end of the day, I'm a local church guy. I think it's one of Compassion's distinctives is all of their work is done through the local church on the ground.
As you come close to people in the global world, God will teach you things about yourself that you would have never otherwise learned. And so it's beautiful to be able to come alongside Compassion so that you can grow in your view and your perspective of God.
I see Compassion as an on-ramp, and it's really given us the opportunity to share the importance of sharing with others. It's really increasing our capacity as an entire church to love and to look beyond our own selves and to see the needs of others.
I look at Compassion as a real gift to how we could really shape and impact the heart of our congregation to be more in alignment with the heart of God.
This is a great partnership. It's a great tool that helps get people to join in something that's building the kingdom of God.
Our partnership with Compassion, it really allows us to see and do what the Bible calls us to do. And that's what we want at the end.